World Geography students, welcome to Lesson 3 on conflict and cooperation. Our objectives for this lesson are to describe the culture's role in instances of cooperation and conflict, to analyze culture's role in boundary disputes, and to explain how conflict and cooperation affect social, political, and economic systems. Remember, we've talked about in class in starting your own study guide, whether you use Quizlet, which is my personal favorite, or if you have a different program that you would like to use, or even if you want to do old school notebooks with your vocabulary, make sure that you're noting these important terms and their meanings. Down at the bottom of the screen, you can see apartheid. Apartheid is that first word. And that's the policy of segregating people by race, specifically a term that was used in relation to South Africa. Also, we have the demilitarized zone. Sometimes you'll see that referred to as the DMZ, which is an area of land between two or more groups where no military activity or weapons are allowed. Usually in the news today, you'll hear of the DMZ as the area between North Korea and South Korea, if you want to put a current reference by your notation. So we've got apartheid and the demilitarized zone, or the DMZ. When we're talking about boundary conflicts and cooperation, there are two boundaries that are important. We have physical boundaries and political boundaries, and we'll look at each one of those. So physical boundaries and political boundaries. Physical boundaries are going to be those that are natural in nature. So, for instance, rivers, oceans, mountains, deserts, anything that can be found in nature is going to be considered a physical boundary between two areas, two nations, two regions. For instance, I live in Columbus, which is on the boundary between Georgia and Alabama, and the Chattahoochee River serves as a physical boundary between Georgia and Alabama. Political boundaries are created by people, usually are invisible. So for instance, the school district, the county you live in, different states, or different countries. Political boundaries, though, are very real, and nations or countries protect those boundaries and determine how we live. So the different types of government we have, our different economic systems. So if you think of the boundary between the United States and Canada, for instance, that's a political boundary for the most part. And we have, while we both have democracies, they're slightly different forms of democracy in the government. We have a republic in the United States. They have a parliamentary system in Canada. And like I was saying, I live in Columbus, which is on the boundary between Georgia and Alabama. We have a physical boundary with the Chattahoochee River, but the political boundary is there too, that says, hey, the Chattahoochee River is going to be the divider between Alabama and Georgia. Political boundaries can lead to conflict. Boundaries don't reflect the cultural composition of the nation. And what that means is, if you look at this picture of Spain over here, and there's a small space, the Basque region. It's inside of Spain, but culturally the Basque region is different than the rest of Spain. Also, political boundaries may divide two countries, like the bottom there, North Korea and South Korea. When that dividing line was set up, families were split. Though that political line definitely has led to a lot of conflict, including the Korean War in the early 1950s that the United States was involved in. But at the time, the language was the same, the culture was the same, because again, some families were split when they made that line. If you lived in North Korea and your cousins lived in South Korea, that line split you with that political boundary. Do political boundaries change? Yes, absolutely. So if we look at some of these pictures here on this slide, the Roman Empire which was very strong in the early part of our Common Era. That's what that CE stands for. Sometimes you'll see it as AD. So it ended in 476 AD or 476 CE. But you can see it encompassed all around the Mediterranean Sea. So Southern Europe, Northern Africa, and what we call today like Israel, those countries that are on the western part of like the Middle East. So that definitely has changed because all of those are different nations now. The Roman Empire doesn't exist anymore. If you look at the next picture to the right, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, when the USSR fell, then all of these smaller nation states began to develop. So, of course, you have Russia, but if you can see there, you've got lots of other little countries, the satellite nations that evolved from the breakup of the USSR. And then, of course, if you look at the Mongolian Empire, which was huge, 12.74 million miles or 22% of the world, when the Mongolian Empire fell, look at all the countries that encompassed today. So you've got actually China, what we consider today Mongolia, Nepal, the southern part, or excuse me, the southern part of Asia there, northern part of India. So what we would call Pakistan, Afghanistan, all the way over into Western Europe and Eastern Europe. Those countries there were part of the Mongolian Empire. All right, so far we've learned that culture is a factor in world conflict and cooperation. Areas in the world are separated by boundaries, whether those are physical, which means created by nature, such as water, mountain systems, and deserts, or political, created by people, which are generally drawn along cultural lines. Conflict most often occurs in places where people of different cultures live near each other and must compete for resources, and nations of the world are connected politically, economically, and socially. Reorganization of economic, political, and social organizations occur often and frequently have a global impact. All right, we've got a question slide there. We're going to talk a few more things. And guys, remember, even though we've got the PowerPoints here for you and some short presentations, make sure that after each lesson, you're actually going into Canvas and reading the lesson material that's there. It's going to have additional information for you, graphs, pictures, as well as reading material. So treat it like your textbook, that you need to go in and review that material more in depth in each one of these lessons. Our next one here is settlement and movement. Goals are going to be evaluate the characteristics that make places desirable for settlement, describe the factors that cause people to migrate, explain the impact of human migration on physical and human systems, compare the settlement characteristics of developing and developed nations. So here is another list of vocabulary terms for you guys who are building your study guide or putting together a Quizlet for yourself for Unit 1. The first one here is over-urbanization. And that's when people or population exceed an area's ability to provide necessary services. It means it's just too many people for that area. Sustainable development, an area's ability to meet its current needs without reducing its ability to meet its future needs. Sustainable urban development is a city's ability to meet its current needs without reducing its ability to meet its future needs. Unsustainable development, when resources are being used up at a faster rate than they can be replenished. Urban form, the way in which a land is used in cities. And urbanization, the increase in the population of a city. We did talk about earlier push factors and pull factors. And here's another graph for you guys to reference. Because like we stated in the earlier lessons, this is one of those things that we're going to need to retain this information all year long. Why do people leave where they live? That's going to be a push factor. So unemployment, lack of safety, lack of services, poverty, crop failure, drought, war or civil unrest. hazards, isolation, and pull factors. What might be positive reasons for people to move somewhere else and leave where they live currently? It might be the potential for employment, a safer atmosphere, better service provision, more wealth, fertile land, good food supplies, political security, less risk of natural hazards, maybe friends and family. But reasons why people might want to move somewhere else are pull factors. Reasons for settlement. When you look at why people live where they do, there are a few distinct reasons. The resources in the area, rich soil to grow crops, land and access to water. And we've talked about that a lot in class so far. Access to fresh water is a huge reason for people to live where they do. And of course, transportation. All right, looking at sustainable development. How can we sustain what we have resource-wise? Let's review. In this lesson, you've learned settlement patterns give an area a sense of place and provide insight into regional issues. Settlement patterns are influenced by push and pull factors. A higher standard of living is available in more economically developed countries than in less economically developed countries. A higher standard of living, it just means how well people live. Do they have access to healthcare, education, better housing, better foods? Urbanization in the world is steadily increasing. That just means more people are moving to city or urban environments. Planning is necessary to ensure sustainable development. Can we sustain those resources that we have? And land values are affected by transportation systems, availability of resources, economic activities, and people's perceptions of an area. All right, so again, guys, make sure you're going in and reading these. We're looking for settlement and movement. Read these lessons inside of Canvas. They're so helpful. And of course, reach out to me if you have any questions at all. My email address is bford@georgiacyber.org. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys again soon. Thanks a lot.